Hey guys, welcome back to Nioh. This time we're looking at all the 9 weapons in the games, and I'm gonna rank them from worst to best. However, this isn't based on what's the best as in what's the most viable. It's based on what I found the most fun. So let's start from number 9, which is the big boy axe. I haven't used this weapon much, but when I have, it's been kinda meh. It's too slow and clunky for me to really like it. And despite the size of it, it has surprisingly poor reach. So, I don't hate it, but as it is, I think there are 8 better options than this. And there's something about having a big brute's weapon like this that just doesn't fit for me. I prefer the style of the other weapons. Number 8 is the spear. It has great reach, as you would expect from a spear. But despite that, it's kind of easy to mess up using it. If you hit walls, it will bounce off them and leave you in a very poor state. I found that a bit annoying, especially with high stance. And usually the mid stance has good horizontal coverage, but surprisingly the spear kinda doesn't. It's okay, but even the sword has better wide reach than the spear, for some reason. But the spear does have some style, I'll give it that, especially the low stance. Though low stance doesn't have great reach despite being a spear, so even then it's kinda Again, it's not a bad weapon by any means, just not one I like using that much. And I hate spear enemies, and I don't want to become that which I hate. At number 7 we have the dual swords. These weapons I haven't used much, but when I have, they were pretty fun. They're some of the fastest weapons out of all the weapons, and they come with style. They're especially good if you want to inflict status effects on bosses thanks to their speed, and they have some pretty neat looking skills. These could be ranked higher if I had used them more, and I almost chose them as my primary weapon in Nioh 1, but I then chose the number 6 weapon instead, which is the sword, the katana. And I like this weapon quite a bit. It's like the most trusty weapon, it's the default weapon, you can't go wrong with it. It does everything pretty good, but nothing super great, and I kinda like that. High stance lets you wreck things with high damage output, and is especially good at knocking horns off yokai. Mid stance is good for boss fights and other fights you need some decent damage but also mobility, but it's not so good at crowd control. It doesn't have the best wide reach, but it's still kind of better than the spear in this regard. But I love the low stance, it's quick and does decent damage. So the sword is good, but there's still other weapons I prefer. Number 5 is the Tonfas. Very cool weapon, but not the best at crowd control, and it has pretty poor reach. But on single target it's great. Some of the skills it has do make up for the short range. I haven't used this weapon much, but I kinda wish I had, just because of its style. Though it's a bit silly how you can literally punch people's heads and arms off. Like, it's a blunt weapon, how does that work? But not really much else to say, as it's one of my least used weapons. But out of the weapons I haven't used much, it's my favorite. But I might use it in the future, because it's a really cool weapon. Number 4 is the Kusarigama. This weapon also has style. It's very unique as, instead of having single hits, it strikes multiple times very fast. This makes it great for applying debuffs to enemies, as well as keeping enemies stunned for a long time. High stance is godly against bosses and revenants, and it does great damage. Mid stance is great against multiple enemies, and low stance is what you'd expect. Super fast, not great damage, but it gets the job done if you need some speed. And the weapon goes very well with a ninjutsu build if you are into that. Personally, I prefer Onmyo magic. At number 3 we have the Switchglaive, which was my primary weapon on my first playthrough of Nioh 2. And now that we're in the top 3, the weapons are just god tier. The best thing about the Switchglaive is how effective it is against bosses. It just destroys them in high stance. And this weapon scales with magic, which I like using. This is the most fantasy themed weapon out of the bunch too. It's like from Bloodborne or Monster Hunter. I love how in every stance the weapon changes form. In low stance it's like a beast hunter save from Bloodborne. It's very flashy and super quick. However, it does very low damage and requires you to be spammy, which is why I don't really like using it that much. Mid stance is great though. It takes the form of a spear, and unlike the actual spear, it's great against multiple enemies. And it does good enough damage too. High stance is the most useful though. It wrecks just about everything. And in both this and the previous stance, it has very good reach. So all in all, it's a very solid weapon, and I'm happy I picked it for my first playthrough. Number 2 is the Adachi, and Adachi was my babe on my second playthrough of the first Nioh. I would not have enjoyed it as much if I hadn't used it. And this weapon was all I needed for that playthrough. No secondary weapons were needed. This weapon covers it all. It has nice single quick hits in low stance, awesome crowd control in the mid stance, and some of the best damage output in high stance. And of course, good reach. And that's about all you really need. It's great for boss fights, it's great for clearing areas, it's fun to use. All around a solid weapon. The only problem is that I don't really know what would make for a good secondary weapon with this build. The axe would scale the best, but I don't like using the axe, so I don't know. But like I said, if I'm using the Adachi is all I need really. So oh well. And the executions with the Adachi are great. But number one is the hatchets. Do they have great reach? No, they don't, unless you throw them. Do they have the best damage output? Nope. Are they great against multiple enemies? Not really. But damn it! I love using them! I just love the animations on the basic attacks. They just look really flashy without being over the top. And they do come with some special utilities. They technically have the best reach out of any weapon because you can throw them. And it actually does good damage, especially if you charge it up. They can be used wisely in certain situations. And the hatchets go well as a secondary weapon for a magic build with the Switchglaive. I'm so glad I chose those two weapons for my first playthrough of Nioh 2. So that's all the weapons in Nioh. Let me know which ones you love using the most. If you want to know which weapons I think are actually the best, as in the strongest, they would probably be the Switchglaive and the Kusarigama. The Switchglaive especially. It goes with magic, which is the strongest build in the game in my opinion. But the hatchets are the most fun for me, so for that they're number one. Anyway, thanks for watching guys. See ya!